This is the fourth in our counting series, which looks at the early foundations of counting. Tonight, we're going to be looking a bit more at counting routines and how we can begin to kind of use these in our everyday opportunities with children. We will go over some of the kind of key main points just regarding use of teams, because aware that one or two people this might be your first time joining us. So some of you can just go and grab a wee coffee at this point as we go over these. You might be more familiar with our wee introduction here, but if you're brand new, if you're joining us from a laptop, these are the options that you will see on your screen for Teams. So you've got the options to join in the chat, and you put your hands up if you want to say something. If you're able to make sure that your camera and microphone are off, so making sure that the line is through both of those, that just helps with the bandwidth, just because we've got quite large numbers. If you do experience any problems with either the sound or with being able to see the slides, we would always suggest that you click the red leave button and then try to rejoin. And just as a reminder, the session is being recorded tonight. If you're joining us from a mobile or from a device, another device, a tablet example, you might see these options. It's still the same. You've got the options for muting your camera and turning off your microphone. You've also got the option to leave and rejoin with the red button. And then if you click the three dots, that allows you to be able to type into the chat. And there's a few opportunities for you to do that today. So if you've not had a chance to introduce yourself in the chat, you can have a go now. You'll either have the option at the bottom to click on the pencil, type a message and send it, or if you're using a device or a tablet, you can have a go. It looks just more like sending a text message where you type it out and then you click return and that sends us in. So just to kind of go over some of the protocols, as we say, please do keep your microphone muted. It just helps others to be able to hear what the presenters are saying. Do ask questions in the chat. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Maria Docherty and myself, Yvonne Somerville, both from the Education Scotland Numeracy and Maths team, and we'll be keeping an eye on questions that come in. As I say, if you have any problems with the slides or being able to hear us, your best option is kind of turning it back on and off again. So try leaving and rejoining. And if that still doesn't work, put a wee message in the chat and we'll try and help you. And we've got our colleague Ian Fife on the call with us, who is recording this session, and it will be added to the Padlet. Just before we start tonight, an apology that we had some technical issues during session 3, which meant that the recording didn't actually work fully. So Maria and I are in the process of re-recording these slides, trying to find a spare hour in both of our diaries to be able to do that, but it will be added to the Padlet as soon as possible. We've put the slides up for session 3 and we'll try our best to get the recording up there as soon as possible. So as I said, tonight we're looking at counting routines. We're talking about the importance of them, and we're sharing some ideas of how you can support the counting routines in your setting. This is a safe space for you to share your ideas, to discuss and to learn from each other as well as ourselves. A big kind of key point from this has been the feedback that's come through from you guys and the ideas that you've shared, and that's kind of really what makes these sessions the kind of best that they can be. So please do share your ideas as we go through the session tonight. I'm going to hand over to Maria now, who's going to start off with a wee connector for us.
Thank you, Yvonne, and hello everyone. So if you've joined and attended some of the sessions previously, you'll know that we like to incorporate a little connector activity before we engage in the more sort of formal content of each of the sessions. So have a look at the images that you see on the slide just now and think about, since returning from your Easter break, which seems probably a long time ago now, are you still feeling quite chilled and relaxed? So are you maybe number 1 or number 5? Are you still eating your way through those mountains of chocolates? So maybe picking number 3, or are you kind of right back in the thick of things and maybe counting down to your next priority? So thinking about number 4 here, or are you thinking about your next holiday? So I'll give you a minute to think about that and pop a wee number into the chat just to let us know how you're feeling. Number 4, oh, all too familiar, I'm afraid. Number 4. Number 5 is me too, because I'm going to say this now and I'll hopefully not rub it in too much, but I stop tomorrow for a week in the sunshine. So I'm just tired and sort of walking, stumbling, crawling to the finish line just now. Lots of number 4s coming through, which is, yeah, last week number 2. So things are changing on a daily or a weekly basis. Yep. And that's just that number 4. It's a busy term. Yvonne's still working her way through chocolate. So yes, we've got a number 3 in there too. But yes, it's a really busy term, isn't it? Because you're trying to finalise and move things on, and that realisation that you don't have another term coming, that you can finish off all the things that you need to do, and you've got a never-ending to-do list. So it sounds very familiar from my point of view. And yes, Suzanne, tired. Some people feeling all of the above, depending on the time of the day or the day of the week. So yeah, quite good to sit and just get a wee temperature check in terms of how people are feeling. But we'll move on just now. Keep popping them into the chat if you remember the numbers, but we'll move on just now. So again, if you're familiar with the sessions that Yvonne and I have delivered so far, you'll know that we provide at the end of each session a takeaway task. And we like to take time at the beginning of the following session just to do a wee bit of a check-in. So just that wee bit of a check-in and reflection on how you found the last session. So the last session, for those of you who either didn't come along or can't remember, we focused on counting principles. So it would be really nice for us just for you to post into the chat, to come in and share anything with us in terms of, did you look at the takeaway task? Did you take some of the learning in terms of the counting principles back to your own establishment? Was it maybe that you just thought about some of the activities and the thinking that we shared on your own, so a wee bit of self-reflection? Or did you maybe take some of the tasks and share it with your peers? Did you try some of the suggested activities on the takeaway grid with your own children? Was there any noticings or wonderings that you want to share with us? Any light bulb moments, which are always good in terms of what the children did or said, or in terms of your own professional development. So again, I'm just going to pause to allow that wee bit of reflection in terms of how did you find the learning between last session and this session? And please don't worry if you didn't have a chance, because as we've identified in the chat, it's a busy time. And that's the reason we have the Padlet, which I'm going to come on to in a minute, so that you can revisit some of the learning and some of the takeaway tasks in your own time. And that's good. There seems to be lots of sharing happening, where people are taking some of the main messages back to their own staff and discussing it maybe at team meetings, etc., which is great. That's exactly what Yvonne and I were kind of hoping for, that people would be able to do. Again, that abstraction principle, loving that, Mrs. Perry, sorry, I'm calling you by your very formal name, but that's sometimes one of the principles that we don't focus on an awful lot. You know, we're maybe focusing on the how to count, but not always the same time is given to the what to count, sorry, so that's good. That better, deeper understanding, which is great. Self-reflection, we all need to do that. Yvonne and I do that regularly too, because we're still learning and continue to learn. Great. And it's about that, you know, that Padlet. So I'm just going to move on to the Padlet just now, because I think that leads us quite nicely into the Padlet, because people are saying in the chat that they're sharing some of the messages with their staff, and having all of that information in the Padlet is a really good way of keeping the information in one place for that very reason, so that you can revisit. You can maybe focus in on one particular area, because Yvonne and I are aware that we share quite a lot across these sessions, but maybe through self-reflection or through conversations with your peers, you think actually subotising is the one that we maybe need to do a wee bit more forensic investigation on. So let's make that a focus. So all of that information will be contained in that one place in that Padlet. And again, that's so that you can revisit this in your own time, or again, share it when you've got, so, you know, the time to do that. So I've just popped a wee link into the chat there for the people who are maybe new to the sessions. That will give you an idea of what we contain in the Padlet. So it's the recordings, it's copies of the presentations, it's the takeaway grids that I just spoke about, and it's any research, any reading, any links that we think are quite useful, and it just keeps it all in that one handy wee place. So I'm glad that people are saying that they're able to share that with their staff, which is great. So we're going to move on a little bit just to kind of bring us in gently to the focus of tonight's session. And it sort of picks up really nicely from the session the last time when we did look at those counting principles. And we know from that session, and we know from the work that we do with our children, that children need to count on a regular basis. They need to count across a range of different contexts. There are frequent opportunities for children to count during their day. And again, we shared a lot of those ideas at the last session about how to effectively incorporate counting into those everyday opportunities. And that might include just using verbal counting, so you're saying or you're singing the counting sequence, or it might be object counting when you're counting for a reason, you're counting to find how many. And this can be just brought in really nicely into their everyday activities. These are hugely valuable but really meaningful counting experiences. But alongside these, there are times when we need to deliberately focus children on counting, and we need to attend to how they count, and these are equally as important too. They allow children to spend time playing with counting, experimenting with ways to count, and to really wallow in counting as an enjoyable activity. Part of Yvonne and I's job really is to try to develop positive attitudes to numeracy and maths, and not to be afraid to make mistakes. And that's not just in counting, that's across the piece. It can be facilitated through allowing children to explore and experiment and discover. Repeating activities or tasks on a regular basis will really help develop their understanding of some essential mathematical concepts. Children will begin to understand if we offer regular daily routines like snack time. We spent quite a wee bit of time last time looking at snack time and how that provides opportunities for children to use numbers to describe things in meaningful context, but for that real purpose. They need to see the need to count. And for us, it's about encouraging children to use numbers in a context, because that can really help deepen their understanding. Children can then apply their knowledge through that experimentation and test that new knowledge and understanding by using numbers in context through the day in those real life situations. That brings us quite nicely on to the focus for tonight's session, and that is counting collections. So I just want to give a wee bit of information about what is meant by counting collections. So in a typical counting collection session, children will normally work in pairs or in trios. And what they'll do in those pairs and trios is plan and count and record their shared counting of collections of objects. It kind of is what it says on the tin. It is important to stress that you should tailor an approach to suit your own setting and your own learners, and incorporate and adapt the aspects of what we share with you tonight into your own practice, using structures flexibly to suit your own individual context. So we will give the high level messages, and it's about you taking that and making that fit your learners and your context. The goal is to engage children coordinating the various aspects of counting in order to find out how many are in a given set of objects. Essentially, they should be given opportunities to demonstrate understanding of the counting principles that we covered in the last session. What might be a wee bit different about counting collections, however, is that children are encouraged to count and represent in ways that make sense to them. It's not necessarily an adult demonstrating and leading that. It's about following the learners and giving the learners the opportunities to demonstrate that in ways that make sense to them. Children will work in their pairs or their trios to choose, to strategise, to count and to record how many items there are. This can be quite structured. We're going to show you tonight ways of making that less structured, but it can be quite structured too. And it can be brought into weekly counting collection sessions of about 30 minutes is probably the most. But again, you can tailor that to suit your own learners. Before we move on, I just wanted to outline and highlight a few benefits. So during a counting collection session, the children can develop the principles that we spoke about and discussed at the last session. So they would be able to demonstrate the stable order principle. They would be able to demonstrate the one-to-one correspondence, which is giving one number name to one object when counting. But they would also be able to demonstrate that understanding of cardinality and knowing that the last number stated in their collection represents how many in that total group. For us as practitioners, it's about having pots and trays and bags to count into, and that can really help children. And we spoke about this at the last session. Sometimes they find it difficult to separate what's been counted from what's not yet been counted. So having all those things like pots and trays can really help children move one item at a time. And it really helps them know that all the objects that have been counted so far are in the container, so in the pot or in the tray or in the bag, and really helps them separate that counted from not counted. The counting collections approach supports subotising, which we've mentioned quite a wee bit in the chat, which is great. It also allows them to compare numbers. It lets them see the composition of numbers. Also provides rich activities and opportunities for them to practice oral counting, to develop efficient counting strategies, to group objects in quite strategic ways sometimes, and to record numbers and represent their thinking in different ways. So really rich, and we're going to talk through some scenarios later on about ways that you can do that. Other important concepts that are also experienced through a counting collection session is estimating, and we'll talk about that a wee bit later on. They can also develop skip counting and demonstrate their understanding of skip counting, place value, all these important concepts, but it's about those flexible counting strategies. So number sense really is at the heart of an effective counting collection session. Some of the counting collection examples we will discuss today will be based on provocations that follow the children's interest, and we're hoping to share that as we share with you some scenarios a wee bit later on. This here's a wee bit of a reflection space. Again, this might be one that you want to revisit beyond today's session. You might again want to share the thinking initially with yourself. You might want to just go back and revisit this, or again share the thinking with your peers. We've added some of the thinking here to the takeaway task, and we'll share that with you at the end of tonight's session. Again, it's just about ways of promoting that deeper engagement with some of the wonderings that we might have. So the role of the adult is to provide stimulating and engaging counting choices and collections, to question, to deepen understanding, and to provide that scaffolding when learners need it. And again, that goes back to you knowing your learners in your own context. It also works really well for children to create their own collections, in addition to any that are provided by yourselves. So to help facilitate an effective collection, there should be a variety of collections, but also tools, and we'll talk again a wee bit later about what we mean by tools, but these collections and these tools should be made available across your spaces so that children can really freely access them throughout the day as part of their experiences and their interactions. You might have a counting library, you might have different size tubs, jars, all these really inviting objects that will really promote that idea of counting. But also the tools that I mentioned are what are the resources that we have available to us that will help the counting process and allow the children to do that separation from what's counted and what's not yet counted. Things like pen frames, pots, number tracks, numeral cards, all of this we'll explain a wee bit later on. And children, these should be made available for children just as part of their play or as part of their, interactions, so that we can help develop their understanding that bit deeper. We want the children to choose to play and sort and group and recognise patterns and count with the collections during their play, and that would allow them to express and expand their mathematical interests, and again go back to that deepening their understanding. So go back and revisit this space in terms of your own experience and think about the variety of objects that you maybe have. What do they look like? Are they all the same? Do you have different shapes and coloured items and objects? Are they different sizes? Just so that the children can pick things that are really appealing and interesting to them. How are they stored? So think about how accessible they are for the children. Can they reach them? Are they too heavy? Are they too high up? These are all the things that a wee audit is good to looking at it from a child's perspective. And again, about those tools, what tools do you have that are readily available for the children that will really help support the counting and the recording of the count that we'll move on to as we share the scenarios with you. I mentioned a wee bit earlier on about the skill of estimating, and Yvonne and I and the wider team are always looking for effective ways to promote the skill of estimating. Counting collections provide an ideal opportunity to do this as a way of promoting that mathematical curiosity, ensuring the focus remains on the process of learning and not always on that final answer or on that final outcome, which we know a lot of our learners are really focused on. And we use these statements all the time, but we're not apologising for that. But those statements such as I notice or I wonder can really lead to a powerful conversational space where ideas, mathematical ideas or other ideas kind of naturally emerge. So leaving them quite open-ended, I wonder, I notice, and I use them a lot in my adult life as well because it helps me sort of digest and really deeply engage with thinking. Using statements like the questions are the ones that you see on the slide just now, allow the children to respond to the statements or the questions. It allows them to clarify or maybe justify And again, these are skills that we want our children to start developing quite early. Essentially, questions like this shift that focus from practitioners explaining all the time to actually focusing on the children's ideas. So using questions such as the ones that you see in the slide allow our children to think deeper, to justify, and again, these skills, as I said earlier, are skills that we really want the children to start thinking about as early as possible. Again, think back to an experience that you've maybe had today or quite recently when you've been involved in a counting experience with your children. And think about the mathematical language that your children are likely to use when they're either grouping or they're sorting or they're counting. They actually do this quite naturally when they're involved in their interactions and during those playful experiences. And we know from experience and from research that children are much more able to retain and understand the language that's used, which can be quite problematic and quite difficult for some learners. But we know they can understand that and retain it easier if they can link it to an experience. So it's all about that experiential learning. And we know that some of the ideas that we can see on the screen just now, the idea of more and less can be quite difficult for children. Even that idea of before and after, how many we have altogether, some of this is quite difficult for young children. So again, it's about that, how do we model that and how do we provide opportunities for children to demonstrate what they know or indeed what they don't know, because that would allow us to then help develop that aspect of their learning or their development. So I hope that's given you a bit of an overview of counting and the mathematical rich learning that can come from them. I'm going to pass back to Yvonne just now and we're going to talk a wee bit more about counting collections in more detail.
Thank you, Maria. I don't know if you noticed as well, somebody had shared a really nice picture in the chat. Unfortunately, I can't see the name. It just says guest, but it's a picture of a staircase and it's got different numerals on it, which I can imagine has got lots of really great opportunities for counting forwards and backwards as children move around up and down the staircase. So that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And apologies, I can't see your name. So as Maria said, counting collections, it's really just the kind of fancy title that is given to things that children that can count that are in different boxes, jars and bags. And they can have different numbers of items in them depending on the children. As Maria said, it's really important that it's a variety of objects, not just all things that look the same, but going back to that identical and non-identical items. So it's supporting that abstraction principle so that children are realising that they can count things that look the same and things that look different all as one set. And as we go through the sessions tonight, we're going to break down these 4 steps from children choosing what they're going to count, being supported to plan how they're going to count, actually doing the counting, and then being encouraged to record what they count. So we know that in counting, children will always express preferences about the things or the collections of things that they like to count. So they'll often identify their favourite things to count. So I'm sure you can think of children across your setting, you know, they love counting the cars or the blocks or the bricks or the pebbles or whatever it is that you've got in your setting. Having a range of different types of objects across the setting is really important so that they can count long objects, things that they enjoy lining up, things that are maybe round, some prefer larger objects that they can spread across different spaces. And we know that it's that repeated counting of the collections of objects that gives that interest to children. And research shows that actually counting the same things over and over again is the same as reading your favourite story over and over again. It kind of sparks that same joy and interest doing the same things because it's that kind of familiar rehearsing with familiar items, you know, and noticing new things as you count each time. So what Maria and I have done have pulled together some scenarios that hopefully you will be able to kind of recognise how these might appear within your setting and think about actually how might you adapt them, how might you use the spark of interest to do something similar in your setting. So in the first scenario, we're going to talk you through how enjoying a pirate story led to some treasure counting activities. So in this setting, the children had enjoyed hearing a pirate story. This led to lots of interest in other pirate books being read and shared and enjoyed. And then the setting began to notice that this was kind of trickling through into children's play. So lots of different pirate play going on within the setting, which included creating their own pirate ship. And then as part of that, some of the children began to produce their own treasure maps, and they were following directions and routes around the setting, helping each other to look for the treasure. And so one day a new map appeared. So this was obviously kind of placed there by the staff purposely. The children were very excited when they found this new map following the directions around, and they came across the treasure. So, as you can imagine, when they spotted the treasure, they were very eager to find out exactly how much treasure they had found. And so it's then at this stage that we could just let the children count it and kind of they count it and they work out how many there is and that's it. But actually, if we're thinking about rich counting opportunities, we can actually help to support their planning. And as Maria said, it's these open-ended questions about wondering. Now, I've included some on the slide here. Obviously, you would not expect to ask the children every single question, but here just some of the things that you might have asked. So you might have reinforced, oh, I wonder how many coins there are, or I wonder how we're going to keep track of counting all these coins. I wonder how we're going to know which coins we've counted and which coins we've still got left to count. So you can see how just a little bit of a spark of a question can help to then guide their thinking about, actually, we're going to need to think about how we count these here. So in this particular setting, one of the children that were involved, Ben, said that they should line them up to count them because that's the best and easiest way, counting from the beginning and counting all the coins. So the children set about carefully lining up all the coins in a row and they began to count them. And again, I'm sure if you're pictured in the scene, you'll see lots of excited little fingers trying to count up and down and naturally getting in a bit of a jumble with where they'd started, which ones they'd counted, which ones they hadn't. This was really frustrating one of the little children, Amira, in the group, because they were having to stop and start counting from the beginning all of the time. So rather than just kind of Amira giving up, a staff member kind of interjected with a little interaction asking, I wondered if there's a way of working out which ones we've counted. And it was then at that point that Ben suggested that he went to get a 10 frame to go and help them. And so everybody in the counting group had agreed that that was a really good idea of keeping track. So you can see that then they went off and they got their 10 frames. And the children began to arrange all the different treasure that they'd found into the 10 frame. And then, so an adult then said to me, how many coins have you found? And she was able to say that there was 10 and 10 and 6, but I don't know the real how many. So that kind of gives that understanding that Amira knows the totals of 10 on the 10 frame, and she knows that 10, 10 and 6 isn't the final total there, but she's not quite at the stage of being able to count all of those all together. So again, rather than the adult just saying, well, it's 26, a kind of interaction was used as a way of saying, well, I wonder how we could check how many there is. And so at this point, Ben knew another way that we could check, and he went over into the numeracy area and he picked up a 10 frame, 100 square, sorry, and he laid out the coins on the 100 square. And then, so with some help, and again, this is where you're kind of scaffolding your interactions in a sensitive way, able to support the children to see that actually the 10, and the 6 made 26 coins altogether. So then the children were convinced that the pirates might come back to steal some of the treasure. So they decided that they were going to keep a note of how many coins there were by writing it down. And over the next few days, there was lots of children eagerly counting the coins just to check that there was definitely still 26 and the pirates hadn't stolen any. You can see an example of recording the count, and that's obviously very symbolic in terms of the child in this example has used the numerals. One of the tasks on tonight's takeaway grid is actually exploring children's mathematical graphic making or mathematical mark making, depending on whose research you're reading. in a bit more detail, and we've included a link to an article there that talks you through the different stages, and you'll see some different examples as we go through tonight that actually the recording of the count might not necessarily look like that in its numeral form, but we still should be encouraging that. So in the example that I've just talked you through, we saw that Ben and Amira were working together to count. So I'd like you just to stop for a moment and type into the chat some of the benefits that you might observe when children are given the opportunity to count together. See quite a few examples coming through there. So people saying that there's the scaffolding, they're helping each other, they're supporting each other, the possibility that there's the opportunity to learn from a stronger peer, that they can kind of define their own, defend their understanding, sharing their ideas with each other. Maria, I don't know if the chat's moving really fast for me. I don't know if you've picked up on anything there.
Pretty much it's going like a storm, which is great. We can't thank you enough for engaging so much in these types of sharing and reflecting spaces. But yeah, if we move on to the next slide, you've probably covered most of this. Actually, there's maybe an additional one or two to think about, but yes, it is about the children working together. And one of the aims of counting collections is for children to demonstrate and coordinate all the bits, all the aspects of counting. Now, we know from the sessions we've delivered before, and you'll know from your own experiences, that there is a lot of stages and a lot of learning, and it's all developmental. So this kind of slows that down a little bit. And we know that children, and I saw that in the chat there, that children can learn so much from each other as they go through that idea of exploring and discussing and sharing. They're involved in that real meaningful and collaborative experience, and that word collaboration was mentioned, and support was mentioned quite a lot into the chat. But they really are, they're learning from and with each other as they support each other, they offer each other guidance. It's really a rich experience for the children to do that, and that's the difficult part for me as a practitioner. I always wanted to sort of intervene, and actually taking that time just to take a step back and allow the children to explore and experiment and share can be really, really fruitful, because as I said earlier, it goes back to them basing their learning on that experience that they've had. So being involved in a counting collection experience can also support you as practitioners, because you're watching and you're observing and listening to what the children are saying, what they're doing, and that can really help you get that detail. When I talked about that progression there, it'll give you that detail of what the learners know and what they understand. So it can be beneficial for you too in terms of the learning that you can take from it. So keep that in mind too. So thank you again for sharing, but we'll move on to look at scenario number 2. So we're going to share 3 scenarios with you tonight, and both when Yvonne and I were planning this, we were basing it on either professional or personal experience. So this scenario that we're going to talk about just now is actually based on a personal experience of mine. So my middle daughter, when she was much, much younger, obviously, was kind of obsessed by rainbows. So when Yvonne and I were planning it, I thought maybe there's something there that we could just adapt a little bit to suit this session. So I hope you'll agree as we go through it that is indeed the case. So because what we want is that these experiences that we're sharing, or these scenarios, actually are linked to what the children are, what they like, that interest. It really gets them hooked if they can lead that learning. So it should be linked to the experiences and interactions that are on offer, but should really follow the interest of the child. So in this example, it might be that you're out a walk, and this was the exact scenario with my own daughter. We were out walking and we noticed a rainbow in the sky. Now, for me, there wasn't much else to say apart from, oh, there's a pretty rainbow. But for my daughter and from the learners that you work with, it could lead to a very rich and varied discussion about what rainbows are. And this is the conversation my daughter then took on. She was asking me all sorts of questions, not a lot of what I could answer, actually, about what is a rainbow, where do they come from, who makes these rainbows, what are all the colours, what shapes is that I can see, why is it in the sky, is it always going to be there and is it always there and I've just not seen it before, and will it stay there, will it be there tomorrow? So it really does lead to that kind of, as I say, fascination and obsession with rainbows, but really does spark that enthusiasm and that engagement that we're looking for. So it really leads to those rich discussions. Now, that could be followed on, again, using Yvonne's example earlier. You might want to do a wee bit of reading about rainbows. There's an Aylmer book that I got my daughter based on her obsession, and it was all about rainbows, but there's lots and lots of texts out there that actually might stimulate that interest a wee bit further. But following on from that, the children might decide that they want to make their own rainbows. And that would be where we come in terms of providing those collections that the children can choose from. So you'll see in this screen just now some of what we could include in terms of collections, and it might be pom-poms, it could be coloured straws, it could just be chalk if we're thinking about, making these outdoors. It could just be paper and paint or pens. Pipe cleaners work really well because they're very flexible. It could be Play-Doh. That you'll know yourself, and you can add to the chat anything else that you've got that might work in terms of a collection that we've not mentioned. But it is about that variety, and it is about that engagement and that stimulation in terms of the choices. And again, the children might want then to work with each other to think about what they can do to really take that rainbow experience a wee bit further. So this might lead into them working with a partner to plan what they might do next in terms of that collection. So we've got two children here, Alicia and Daniel, and they have decided that they want to make their own rainbow and they want to use pom-poms. So what they do is they then decide that they're going to go and gather some rainbows, some pom-poms to make their own collection. So Alicia's there asking for some pom-poms. And whoever it was that was leading this and the adult that was in the room gave them loads of pom-poms. And again, think back to your own learners. I think from me, they want more and they'll say, oh, I've got millions and trillions, and they start making up these words because they want more and more. And we can see Daniel saying there, oh, we've got loads of pom-poms. And again, that is a very natural expression that in reaction when children have got these collections, they kind of go, oh, there's millions. And it's good to listen in and observe their reactions when presented with these really colourful and engaging collections. And hopefully you can resonate with some of what you're seeing in terms of Daniel saying, wow, there's so many there. They're almost thinking, where do we start? So they've got this collection of pom-poms, and Alicia's already thinking, right, I wonder now how many we have. So they're beginning to move into that idea of planning the collection, because based on the experience of seeing the rainbow and reading about the rainbow, the discussions that they've had, we hope that they know then that they'll need some of each colour. And they might begin to share how they might ensure that they've got enough of each colour. And again, that provides a really good opportunity for us as practitioners to observe how they plan, how they're going to sort, and how are they eventually going to count the pom-poms or whatever objects they pick. And again, it's important to mention at this point and at this stage, they're not doing any formal counting at this point. They're just kind of gathering, they're discussing, and they're learning from each other about how best to move forward in terms of the kind of planning and counting. So Daniel decides that maybe that one of the ways of doing that is that they're going to sort by colour. In order to do that, they need some of these tools that I mentioned earlier on when I was thinking about, sorting and planning. And that will allow them to keep track of the count. So again, think about things that you've got across your own setting, and it might be just tubs. You'll see some of that on the slide just now. You could use baking trays, which I think is a great idea. Egg boxes are also good. Essentially any container that you have that will help them sort in some way. In this case, they've decided they're going to sort by colour. And again, there might be very little or no formal counting taking place at this stage, but there's a whole lot of learning going on. There's a whole lot of sharing and there's experimenting, and that's all good. And again, what we're going to do in the next slide is put on some prompt questions, and that might allow you as practitioners to start thinking about that kind of formative assessment and that challenge and support that might be needed. And that we'll come back to that question, but it is about that. How do you keep that contained? We'll come back to that question in a wee second, if that's okay. So that's a good question. So here are some questions that, again, you might be familiar with some of these, you've probably used these on a daily basis, but it's about that kind of before the formal count. It might be useful to consider some, maybe not all of these questions, but again, it depends on your learners, because it can be really insightful in terms of asking these questions and what our learners might come up with. Again, building on that skill of estimating that I keep going on about, they might be thinking about how many green pom-poms do you think there are. So there's a wee bit in there in terms of thinking about developing that skill of estimating and the questions that we use. And then focusing on a wee bit more on the how they count. Using questions like this is a really effective way that you can then model and explore some of the associated vocabulary that we want the children to understand, but it's done in a very natural way as part of the learning. And we know, out with numeracy and maths and out with counting, but we know the power of questioning. We know how this can really deepen and support understanding. And Yvonne and I are often asked through our engagements with people, how do you effectively gauge where learners are in their thinking or in their developmental progress? And questions like this, the ones that you can see on the slide, can actually really help you to identify what the learners know and understand, and can also be easily differentiated to suit your learners and indeed your context. So again, a worthwhile one to revisit. But now we're going to move on to the kind of more formal counting, excuse me, and the recording element to the counting collections. So it's hoped that through the children's interactions and that exploration and investigation, it's hoped that they'll realise through trial and error, through the doing part of it, that it's quite easy to lose track of the count. And you'll see here that Daniel's saying, you know, I just can't keep up. I keep forgetting how many that we have, and that's probably quite a natural thing for children to say. It is worth, however, allowing the children to experience that kind of productive struggle and let them problem solve their own way to a solution where appropriate. So that hands-on manipulation of all these objects through our counting collections really support that mathematical thinking as children start to move the objects to count, to organise, to sort and to group. There is a substantial amount of research into the importance of using suitable and engaging manipulatives for early number learning, which is why Yvonne and I decided to focus on this as part of this webinar session. And we know, like Daniel there, if they do lose track of the count, it can lead to them missing out items or recounting objects that have already been counted. So allowing them to find more effective ways to count is really worthwhile, because they will say things like that, I'm really mixed up now, I don't know what I've counted, I've lost my count, I keep losing track, etc. So using an example like this and thinking back to what we covered in the last session, children might be effectively demonstrating that stable order principle as they count 1, 2, 3. So, you know, they're showing the understanding of that stable order counting principle. They might also demonstrate the understanding of one-to-one correspondence as they place one pom-pom or one item into the tub, and they do that counting 1, 2, 3 as they're placing and as they're sorting. They might also demonstrate cardinality as they can maybe say they've counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they can say I've counted 6 pink pom-poms. So there's lots of learning in that. And if you think back to what we covered in the last session, this should begin to make sense. They're also demonstrating an awareness of quantity as they assign the correct numeral card. So these children have decided that they're going to keep track of the count by assigning a numeral card to each of the colours. And that matching the numeral and the numeral name and the associated quantity is a really important skill to develop. Quite often what we see is one or two of those things matched, but not all three. So it's the numeral name, and the associated quantity. And you can see that in the image with the pom-poms and the count and the numeral card as well. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to talk about the final scenario, but please pop into the chat any further questions that you have, and I'll pass to Yvonne to look at our third scenario.
Thank you, Maria. With regards to the question about kind of stopping children transporting, I was just going to pop a link into a resource that our early learning and childcare team have produced, which is around schematic play. obviously one of the schemas is transporting, where children do like to kind of experiment in terms of carrying it, putting things in containers and in baskets and in pockets and things like that. Um, and so actually, in many ways, if they're looking to move something to another area to count it, um, that's kind of the developmental stage that they are at in terms of the schema that they're showing. So hopefully that link there will give you a little bit more information about kind of transporting, but also the other types of schematic play that you might observe in your children. And I know that our ELC team have got loads of different resources available under that, which are useful to have a look at if it's something that's kind of newer to you. So in the final scenario, we're going to talk you through how Blake's birthday present sparked a whole feast of counting adventures. So Blake excitedly shared with the children in the setting all about the new robot toy that he had got for his birthday. It had robotic arms, it had flashing lights. It sounded like the most exciting birthday present that you could ever get at 4 years old. And so, again, I'm sure you can picture this in your own setting. It sparked a huge interest in robots, with loads and loads of the children really interested to find out more about robots. How do they work? How do they move? Saw lots of examples of large robots being built, small robots being built. Robots being made from construction items, from craft items, even examples of children turning themselves into robots using cardboard, which was very exciting. Lots of different things that we saw, moving parts, wheels, and actually even managed to borrow the STEM kit from the school to have a go at programming some very simple flashing light sequences, which the children enjoyed exploring. As can often happen, the children were so engrossed with the play around robots that a lot of them were very reluctant to stop and to come for snack. They were needing a lot of encouragement to kind of put their robot down, a lot of them not wanting, to leave their robots anywhere. And so a member of staff came up with a good suggestion that actually the robots needed to snack as well. So while you were having snack, the robot was put on the robot snack table. Um, just a very simple suggestion that actually then sparked a whole kind of direction of travel in their play, where they then began kind of making lots of recipes for their robots and cooking up a storm for their robot to eat while they were at the snack table. And then during one of the days, Sam came over and said that he had found what the real robots would like to eat. And he appeared with this collection of things that he had gathered from places like the Tinker Table and the construction. And I think that's kind of reinforcing that point that actually transportation in this instance is great, because it led on to what we're about to talk about next. So again, the children were very excited, kind of looking at what Ben had found, the real robot food. And again, just rather than kind of letting them count and letting them play away with it, one of the adults asked, "Wow, Sam, you've got so many things for the robots to eat. Have we got enough for all the robots to eat something?" And again, that question there was enough to spark them into, well, there was 4 children who had their robots on the snack table, so they needed to split the things into 4. So one of the children decided that they could put all the same looking things together. So you can see that they've put all the screws, they've put all the washers, all into different sections in the counting tray. Whereas another child thought that actually you could organise them by colour. So you can see that again, in the silver category, there are things that look different, but they've been organised by the way that they look. This also led to that conversation around, well, some of these items are quite big, so actually they would be quite filling for the robot, and some are quite small. And so actually, how will they keep track of what their robot had eaten? And what they hadn't eaten. So again, this sparked some different ways of recording what their robot had eaten, and inevitably what the children had counted. So some of them were drawing pictures of their robot and then adding things that the robot had eaten into the robot's tummy. Some of them also wrote out like menu and recipe cards for the robot snack table and the robot cafe, so that if children wanted to come and make their own combination of robot soup and robot mac and cheese, apparently, they could be recreated by following. And again, you can see there some different stages of children's mathematical development there. Somewhere it is just the symbol, somewhere they're attributing mark making with it as well, and somewhere it's at a much earlier stage. But again, you can still see that there's purpose to that count and to that mark making. So again, something that's really important. So I'm sure you can imagine similar situations that have happened in your setting. And we thought it would be good just to pause for a moment. We've shown you some of the scenarios where adults were able to use their interactions in that sensitive way to scaffold a child's counting experience and children's counting experiences. We know that without the sensitive guided instruction, the chances are the children would just count something, they would work it out how many there was, and that would have been it. Or some of them, like Amira, who was getting frustrated at losing the total count, she probably would have just lost interest, given up and stopped counting. So we'd like you to think of a time where counting has worked well in your setting, and if you could share that in the chat, share some details around kind of what sparked their interest in counting, were they supported in any way in terms of planning or recording it, and we will hopefully be able to copy and paste some of these ideas over into the Padlet as well. So we'll just pause for a moment and give you time to have a wee think. So we've got some counting the dinosaurs, and these are all grouped into colours. Got somebody saying counting coloured blocks, counting snack items, foam Easter egg stickers, marbles with them rolling everywhere, and what do we do to stop them? Chart counting down the days, how many days until sports day? Well, that's interesting. Cubes that are often counted in the groups according to their colour on number block. That's a good link in there. Maria, again, the chat is just moving so quickly. I don't know if you managed to pick up on anything else there.
Not really, but lots of different things coming through. And again, that's the beauty of these sessions, because there's quite a few things there that I thought, oh, I hadn't thought of that myself. So that's the idea, is that we can then, something might just spark something in your own context that maybe a child would like, in terms of, you know, some of the different things that are coming through. So seashells, amazing. Children love these things. And they love this seashells, and animals and dinosaurs are always very popular too. But it could just be, you know, using the children themselves, which is that last comment there, which is great. No resources needed apart from the children or the adults, which is great. So, and that could be quite easily done in terms of what we said at the beginning. You know, just use those everyday opportunities and the resources that you have to hand that are quite accessible. So it can be done in lots and lots of different ways. So yeah, there's lots there to just to share and think about as we move on. Yvonne, are you happy for me just to move on to the wee summary part? I think we've got quite a few good suggestions there.
Yes.
Beads as well, yes. Brilliant. So thank you again for sharing these. So what we're going to do just now, just we're coming up to the end of the session just now, we thought, Yvonne and I thought it would be quite worthwhile just at this stage to do a wee bit of a summary or a wee bit of a recap in terms of what we've covered so far. So what we're going to do is just briefly go over each element again, and hopefully this will allow you to see how the process of counting collections can be adapted quite easily to suit your own children and your own context, because obviously that's very important. So we're just going to quickly whiz through the choose, the plan, the count and record, and just give the kind of high level messages, and then we'll finish off by looking at the next session, etc. So we've spoke about this quite a wee bit, but it's about that providing a variety of interesting objects for the children to count. And that's where it starts, isn't it? We've got to get them hooked. the objects that we do, the collections that we do provide should be easily accessible by the children. And again, it's about that you know your own children. So follow their lead. What might spark for them? It might not be a robot or a rainbow or a pirate, but there's lots of ideas in the chat. And again, follow their lead about what really sparks their imagination. And where possible, try to accommodate this through the collections that you provide. It won't always be possible, but we can go with what we can. And we know that children differ in terms of the experiences they bring with them. So that gives us the responsibility of providing those frequent opportunities to count, so that we can sort of counteract those disparities in children's number or counting experiences. So essentially, we're providing environments which are rich in counting opportunities, with an aim to increase the fluency and the accuracy of counting. And since Yvonne and I have been pulling this together, and I hope that you'll find this too, once you start looking for collections, and it was the same when we spoke about subitising, when you start to look for things to subitise, and it'll be the same with counting collections, when you start thinking about what might we have in terms of counting collections, you're going to start finding sources for good collections everywhere, and your children can really support this because they'll have ideas that can help you with that too. And again, they might want to do their own counting collection in terms of what they have and what they're interested in. So the next stage is that we are going to move into that kind of planning. And this can be the messy bit, but the really interesting phase, because this is where the children will work together to plan and to coordinate the count. This is when they might take time to go through the various, and they might go through sort of various iterations before they decide together on an effective way to plan and to group. And it might be by size, by colour, by shape. We can see all those ideas there, but it's about that they might need to go through a few different ways before they decide on an effective way that they are going to use to plan the count, and who's doing what, how will we keep track. So you'll see all of them, and if you're counting some and I'm counting the others, how do we combine that? So you can see how there's really rich opportunities there for understanding the language, but also those counting principles that are so important. And there should be rich discussions taking place about what's the best way to do it, what's the most appropriate or the most effective way of organising our pom-poms or our golden coins or whatever. So again, just allowing the children to really immerse themselves in that planning stage is really important. And then we move on to the formal sort of counting part of it. But again, just a wee reminder here is that the children should start by estimating first of all, as you saw that we provided some of that in the scenarios that we provided, before they move on to that kind of formal count and recording. So it's about looking around your environment, looking about your own house as well, in terms of what do you have to hand that actually might be useful for the children to use to record that count. And it could be, you'll see some examples there, it could be 10 frames. Egg cartons are great. We start to look at these things that we have around the house with a completely different view when we're immersed in counting. Plastic cups are good as well, paper plates, all those sorting trays. Cupcake liners are really good too. Ice cube trays. And again, we've got our number lines or our 100 square or our sticky notes, post-it notes and things are really good as well. But it's about, from our point of view, it's using the opportunity to really observe and interact with the children as they engage in those paired or discussions with maybe there's 3 of them. But it's about how do we engage with them in those discussions and think about those counting principles as we're doing so. And again, listening to children as they count is really a window into their thinking. It really provides that opportunity to assess their understanding of number relationships, place values, skip counting, all those maths concepts that we mentioned earlier on, because we're looking always for ways to develop that notion of number sense. And the final phase in the counting collection, as we've explored, is the recording part of it. This is a really important part of the process, but in my experience, this is the bit that's sometimes missed. But it really allows the children to demonstrate that sheer joy of showing off what they've discovered. This is the bit that really brings everything together. So it's important that we don't miss this part, I suppose, is kind of what I'm saying. And we know, and I'm hoping that what you've got, oh, sorry, I've clicked on too many times there. I'm hoping that what we've spoken about in terms of the scenarios that Yvonne and I presented tonight, it's about that developing and fostering that student agency. We know that that's a priority and that's a really rich experience to get to. But we hope you've seen through the counting collections process, there's so much space and potential for children making their own decisions. And the complete counting collections process is dead engaging. It really is. It promotes that math discourse. It helps children to build that agency that I mentioned just there. And it can lead to increased fluency and really help children in becoming more articulate about their counting. So we hope that you use some of the learning, and again, we can check in at the next session to see how you've got on with it. Yvonne, I'm going to pass on to you just now, if that's all right.
Yes, thank you very much. So just kind of before we finish up tonight, we know that some people on the call are joining us. They're not in an ELC setting, so they're thinking that they're from school settings, they're maybe from ASN settings. It might be that they're in support for learning departments. So you're actually supporting children with a range of counting abilities. So we thought, just as a final point tonight, it was important to emphasise that the whole notion of counting collections isn't just for those that are working at early level. There is lots of ways that you can continue to use this to develop that love of counting. So in some settings, they'll have what you see on the screen there, where they develop a counting library. So they organise their collections into number ranges. Some of them colour code things. So for example, if it's in a pink container, it's 0 to 5. If it's in a blue container, it's 6 to 10, and so on. It is important to make sure that there is some zero collections in there, and also some that are obviously much, much larger. Important to kind of think about what is still sparking your children's interest. So even if they are primary 7, are you linking things to maybe particular topics that you're doing, or are there particular things that children are interested in? I can think of a particular class where they would love to have counted things like Pokemon and all those sorts of things, and also like seasonal items. How can you change things up in terms of kind of just making things different and appropriate for the kind of current season that they're in. And as children's mathematical skills develop, giving them the opportunity to engage with counting collections enables them to demonstrate as their understanding continues to develop. So, for example, you might ask them to estimate how many there are, and then once they begin to count, they'll be making the links between things like addition. So in this example, they might say that 5 and 5 and 5 makes 15. Or they might be able to say, well, I've made 3 groups of 5, so I know that it's 15. Then they can begin to show their understanding of how addition and subtraction, multiplication and division are linked. What happens if you add 5 more coins? What happens if you take 2 groups of 5 away? All of those things that you can continue to scaffold with your questioning as children's mathematical development continues. Also, when you continue to encourage them to record what they've counted, you'll begin to see these links from their mathematical understanding coming through in their counting. So you might begin to see things like tally marks to record how much they've been counting. And actually, I was in a setting on Monday who had been using tally marks. And this was an ELC setting, and it had come about because somebody had an older sibling who told them that the best way to count in 5s was to do 4 and then a 5th one. So again, other children were really interested in that. So when they were out and about, they were doing a mathematical hunt. The children were actually using tally marks to record it because it's something that had come from the children being interested in. In the image there, you can see that actually the child has recorded it because they've counted the objects in groups of 2. And again, counting collections are a really good way of practicing skip counting, but also given that kind of real and relevant context, children are not just being told to count in 5s and count in 10s, but actually it's building in as part of their exploration of the counting collection that an adult can scaffold and model how to do those things. If you're interested in learning more about counting collections and how these can continue to be used with children, we've included a couple of links on the Padlet which signpost you to some further reading. And then just on the last couple of slides, we have got the Padlet, which again, as Maria said, this is just where everything is. It's where Maria and I now use to look for things rather than trying to hunt for it on our server. If we need a copy of it, we just find it on there because it's easy to have it all together. And we've also included your new takeaway task for this session, a chance for you to go away and think about some of these key discussion points from tonight in a bit more detail. You can, as some people have done, taken them away, completed them individually as a self-reflection type of activity. Some people have been using them as part of their kind of staff development or with a peer back at your setting, or using them as a discussion point. And as always, you can do one, you can do all. It really is what is suitable for you in your setting at this moment in time. And just to say a big thank you to those of you for joining us tonight. Our final session is on the kind of stages beyond counting and how we kind of take things into the next stages of mathematical development, making these links between early addition and things like that. So that is taking place on the 25th of May, which seems like ages away, but actually it's quite scary that next week is May already. So we will see you then. And as always, our contact details are there. Any questions, just drop Maria or I an email on that and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But thank you for joining us. And Maria and I will hang about if anybody's got any last questions. And yes, just enjoy your evening. Safe travels home for those that have got to travel home, and we'll see you again.